I didn't know what it was.
Yeah, okay,
But
we got
when
about,
you said cranking, you said that was right.
we get a little over 20 minutes. We're gonna whip through this fundamentals test 12. We are talking about sensors and stuff, and you know how much I enjoy sensors. Sensors are good, they are our friend. This is fundamentals test 12. Grab your fundamentals test 12 from chapter 29 and 31 of Halderman's textbook. What sensor measures the load on the engine?
Map.
What sensor measures load on the engine?
Map.
Map, because low engine vacuum means high engine load, basically, right? Some of the old transmissions used to have a vacuum line going down to a modulator valve on the transmission, and when you had low vacuum, that little modulator valve would move a little valve in there and it would hold the gears longer. So, so even in those days, whenever there wasn't any electronics involved, low vacuum meant high engine load. Number two, a TP sensor is what kind of sensor?
Potentiometer.
A potentiometer. Number three, what sensor measures the temperature of the engine coolant?
ECT sensor.
Engine coolant temperature sensor. Now you guys got some sheets I passed out along with this test that you could whip through pretty darn quick. Incidentally, I've got a sheet printed out showing you what your grades are looking like right now too. I need to show that to you. What sensor measures the amount of oxygen in the exhaust?
I2. No, I'm sorry, O2S.
O2S. Now let's talk just briefly about that for a minute. Oxygen sensor, what's it supposed to look like if you see it plotted on a graph? If you see an oxygen sensor signal plotted on a graph, or on like if you're graphing it on your scan tool, what should you look at? What should it look like when you see it?
Wouldn't it be like little squares?
Not squares. It's not digital. It's analog.
So it would be the
Camel humps.
up and
You know,
down.
like.
So kind of like a TP sensor only closer.
Except it's actually doing it on its own.
Right.
And it's actually the instantaneous response to the oxygen sensor signal is what? What is the PCM doing with that information?
Adjusting, correcting.
There's 4 parameters that you usually look up, 4 parameter IDs you usually look up in conjunction with the oxygen sensor. The oxygen sensor is a critical component that tells it what. What's it telling it? What's the oxygen sensor telling it, by the way? Well, why do we care about the oxygen? What's up with that?
Isn't it telling how hot it is within the exhaust? Like whether
No, it's not measuring temperature, although some of the old Jeep sensors did measure temperature. It does if it's running lean, or rich. It's measuring after the fact how the engine's doing. If it's balanced, if it's in that 14.7 to 1 range, right? Now there's some different numbers that they use for alcohol because alcohol's, it doesn't have as much energy as gasoline, and it takes a little more of it to do the same job. So basically, if you're looking at gasoline though, your oxygen sensor is going to respond. Now let me hit you with this. And I had told you guys one time about this. I used to, whenever that Ranger was perfectly balanced and everything was like it's supposed to be and it was nearly a brand new truck, at idle, that thing would, the fuel trims would be bouncing close to 0. Long and short fuel trims would be close to 0. Oxygen sensor switching really pretty and all that kind of thing. Mass airflow, and I'm not talking about grams per second here, we're looking at the voltage on the mass airflow sensor, which would start out at, just below a volt and go up to about, 4.5 or so as you're operating the throttle. And I always like looking at mass airflow voltage. And the mass airflow idling, when this Ranger was just like it's supposed to be, would read 0.81 when it was idling. All right, I got another one that would fit that Ranger, and I could plug that thing in, and it was reading 0.79. Now think about what I'm telling you. There's a reason I'm telling you this because it's important. 0.81 is what it would read idling on that one, 0.81. I could take another sensor I had, it was faulty, that was just a little bit skewed, and it would read 0.79. That doesn't sound like it would even make a difference, does it? It's so close to what the other one was reading. But when I put that 0.79 sensor on there, those fuel trims would start walking to the high side until they maxed out. And then long fuel trim, when short fuel trim maxed out to the high side, long fuel trim would start counting up. And when it got up to about 25 or 26%, then the short fuel trims could normalize. So if you got a problem, you're going to see long fuel trims high, short fuel trims close to 0. All right, now the long and short of it is, I would give this to people for a final exam. you will not pull a trouble code except you might see something that says rich adaptive limit reached. But now you've got to find out. This tiny little imbalance in that mass airflow sensor is enough to cause this thing, at least at idling, to go way off toward Robin Hood's barn. You see how sensitive that thing is? I mean, it's extremely sensitive. That mass airflow sensor has got to be accurate in what it's saying, or you're going to have all kinds of issues. You got me? Now, Willie and Melissa were working on the Sable this morning. And Melissa, whenever you were seeing this thing, it was idling rough. And you were determined, you had the idea that what was wrong?
EGR.
You had the idea EGR was flowing. And I admit, it felt like EGR was flowing. What does it act like when EGR flows, Alex? What does it act like, Melissa?
It idles rough.
It idles rough. And it's something that's common to all of the cylinders. It's not just missing on one cylinder. It's idling rough. Okay, so how did we determine the EGR wasn't flowing?
The pipe coming out of the EGR was cool.
Yeah, the pipe coming from the manifold up to the EGR was not hot. So we knew it wasn't flowing EGR, because if it was, that pipe would blister your hand. You shoot it with temperature guns, the right way to do it. Incidentally, I don't know who brought my temperature gun back, but I really appreciate that. It showed up in my desk drawer. Oh, I sure appreciate that.
Where was it?
It was way off in his drawer. I wanted to get a test light.
Yeah.
One of them big ones.
I noticed that you put the test light back in my drawer too, or something. Okay. All right. But it wasn't supposed to be in there. I was thinking, I reached in there and stabbed myself with that test light. You know what I'm saying? But anyway.
Drawer was like this long. I went looking.
No, I tell you the reason it was way up in the drawer. Now the other day when I first found that the thing was missing, I pulled that drawer all the way out, and it wasn't there.
Did it get hung up in the desk?
Did not. Somebody put it back. I don't know who did it, but somebody put it back because I was raising Cain about it, and I don't know where it was. But anyway, one way or another, I was trying to get you this little thing. Take a temperature gun, you could shoot the EGR tube and tell. That's where I got off on that tangent. Okay, so here we are looking at this thing. So as they looked at it, we had fuel trims that were out of balance, and the more they piddled with it and the more they looked at things and the more they tried to figure it out, and they were thinking about doing a smoke test on the manifold. Melissa sprayed some carburetor spray to see if the manifold, see if it had a leak, that would show up. And then it started running better. And then it smoothed out all by itself. And what happened there? What do you think happened? They didn't fix anything. What do you think, Joe?
Well, considering what you told us earlier today about what started the problem, I'm thinking maybe it just corrected itself finally. That it might have just been a temporary problem.
What?
Yeah.
No.
I don't have a clue what he's talking about.
Talking about the rag.
Wet spark. Wet spark plugs. People are backing it out, pulling it in. Crank it up, back it out. Crank it up, pull it in. Crank it up, back it out. Crank it up, pull it in. It's always running cold. It's always running rich. Starts to foul the plugs. And some of them, you got random misfires happening because they're not firing like they should. The longer they run, the more they clean themselves up. And then it finally cleaned up its act and it was running smooth. And see, they were thinking, can you imagine how much money of a customer's money you could spend on a car like that? Now, we'll tell you something else. Contaminated gasoline contaminated oil that's got too much gas in it because they went too long without an oil change, it'll make it have screwed up fuel trim numbers too. So if it's really important, you guys, if you got one that's imbalanced because of air fuel, if you pull the dipstick and you can light that sucker with a cigarette lighter and it burns, you got issues with that oil. You got to change the oil before you do anything else. What you got to do, if you got filthy black oil that smells like gas and burns when you light it, don't keep working on other stuff. Let's change the oil first. It doesn't cost that much to change the oil. It needs it anyway. See?
It did have a vacuum leak though because
Yeah, I'm sure it did.
that thing was shooting air.
And that confused you even more because you fixed one thing, but it still didn't run quite right, so you felt like you needed to work on it some more. But basically, it just needed to run a little while. Now, I will tell you this. If the plugs are fouled bad enough, it will not clean its act up. That one was firing a little on all of them. If there's one of them that totally quits firing and it's cold and dead, it's going to not fire ever no more. And there's nothing you can do to dry that sucker out. You remember the, who was that was working on that Saturn, I mean not the Saturn, but that, the one that you put the fuel pump in. and we were trying to get it started because you had the fuel pump. We cleaned the tank. We put the pump in it. It had stuff in there that looked just absolutely horrible, like something you would just totally want to stay away from. I mean, I've seen stuff on CSI Miami that didn't look that bad. You know what I'm saying? But this thing right here, whenever we look at this thing, and we pull the plugs out, and they were so wet that they were never going to fire again. And then we put plugs in it, and it goes, whoop. Well, me and Moody had a strange thing happen yesterday that you never would have expected on that truck that Gene drives. Gene says it goes, I said, well, maybe it's that theft. If it starts in 20 minutes, well, we got security. I don't want to pull the codes or nothing. Enough time. So anyway, next time I come back from lunch, and him and Moody's the only one here yesterday. Me and him worked our buns off. Anyway, Moody, and he pushes that thing up here, and so that's what I do, Moody.
Oh, you look for spark?
Look for spark at the
They
plug.
were not on the wires, but then you look from the coil to the distributor and it was there.
The coil was making lightning about an inch long, but none of it was making to the plugs. What's between the coil and the plugs on that one? And this has just got one coil.
The distributor.
The distributor cap. It goes to the middle of the distributor cap. The rotor sorts it out, and it goes to the spark plugs it's supposed to go to. It was somehow or another disappearing between there and there. Now, we didn't find any bad wires, did we, as far as open wires? And we were going to measure that little trail inside the distributor cap on that Chevrolet where it goes, plugs in here and goes over to the center of the cap. But there was a magic act that happened, and that distributor cap just vanished without a trace. We have no clue where that cap went. And we were going to actually check it, you know, and that's what he was saying. This is magic. You know, it was like a rabbit went into the hat and he never saw him again, you know. All right.
Did the whole distributor catch?
But anyway, we put plugs and wires in a cap, which is the stuff everybody always does, you know, spark, you know, plug, wires, cap. We put plugs, wires, and cap on it, and that thing whoom, busted right off. And he's been driving it ever since, you know. You know, anyway, but that cap, that distributor cap, I believe was the problem. Because I did not see a burnt through rotor. I did not see anything else that you can see with your naked eye. The spark plug wires weren't bad. It had to be something wrong with that cap. And it's magic. It just vanished away. That cap did not want us checking it. Okay, let's move. Okay. Which sensor measures the temperature of the air entering the engine? Fuel injectors are a computer sensor, a sensor and an output device, and it's neither a sensor nor an output device, or an output device which would be an actuator that's controlled by the computer. That's going to be the dog. Which sensor is located between the air cleaner housing and the throttle body? Mass airflow. The ignition system creates a high voltage which is created, the ignition system, well, that's a lousy, I don't like the way he worded that question. The ignition system creates a high voltage which is created in the
Ignition coil.
How does that happen? Tell me how an ignition coil works. I'm going to sit here until you do and grow a beard.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got a lot of windings. I talked about that last semester. You got a lot of windings in your secondary side, which is where the spark's created, and you got a few windings in the primary side. When you saturate the primary, and there's a core, you know, in the middle that strengthens all that. If you wrap a bunch of wire around and you got a core in the middle of it, is, you know, that's ferrous metal or, you know, something like that, it's going to make it stronger. Okay, so I'm saturating all of those windings by powering one side of the primary and grounding the other side, and I make a magnetic field that's super strong. And then all of a sudden, I break that, and when that field collapses, all that magnetism goes whipping across those windings. And it takes this 12 volts that you've been using to do this with, and because you've got millions of windings in your secondary and hundreds of windings in your primary, it multiplies that voltage times just exponential. Like you have 12 volts coming in, 110,000 coming out. That's how that basically works. Now, listen to this. This will be on your verbal exam. And you'll have to answer questions like that with no notes. So Quincy, when you go home tonight, explain to your mom how an ignition coil works. Incidentally, Quincy's got to have brakes and an oil change on his Power Stroke diesel this afternoon and all that. Rotors, brakes. There won't be any machine in the rotors. We can pop all that on there real quick, can't we? Shouldn't take very long, should it?
You looking at me?
Yeah, he's
We
actually,
work on our own vehicles.
yeah. Yeah, well, typically, but we want to make sure that Quincy makes it home alive. We're not sure that, you know. Okay. Yeah. All right. The ignition system, never mind. What is used to ignite the air fuel mixture in a cylinder of a gasoline engine?
Heat of compression?
spark, you gonna say that.
Huh?
The
Heat of
arc-
compression. That's what ignites it in Quincy's vehicle.
I knew that, come on now.
Yeah, I know you knew that. That's why we couldn't believe that. What ignites the air fuel mixture in a gasoline engine?
Hey, an arc of the spark.
The arc of the spark
I
plug.
knew that,
Waste spark ignition does what?
both B and C.
What do you think, y'all?
I think she's right.
Both B and C. Where did we first see waste spark ignition that y'all know about?
Oh, crap.
Motorcycles.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. How many ignition coils should you expect to have on a V6 engine using a waste spark system?
3.
Huh? You 3? You sure?
Yes.
That sounds good to me.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
3.
Number 12. What term describes the order that the spark reaches the cylinders?
Fire in order.
Fire in order. What's the fire in order of the Ranger? You got 10 seconds?
1, 2, 3,
Not it.
4, 5, 6.
No, that's
Not it.
not on that one. Huh? What is it?
Not it.
No, it's that on mine though.
Not it, not it. 14, 25, 36. 14, 25, 36. 14, 25, 36. I need to turn that thing off. 14, 25, 36. Can you remember that now? That's on that, and what about a 4.3 Chevrolet?
It's,
4.3.
Remember?
it's, 165432.
Very good. Give that man a hand. You got it right. Now remember, he worked on one yesterday, and we put spark plug wire on
Oh,
it.
okay.
The fact that he could do that off the top of his head just boggles your mind, didn't it? Makes you want to,
My hair back.
man. Yeah, maybe you want to grow there. Technician A says the fuel pump relay is usually controlled by the PCM. Technician B says the TBI injector squirts fuel above the throttle plate. What about that?
A.
That's Charlie, both of them.
I knew that.
You know the fuel pump relay is controlled by the PCM. Y'all already seen that. Where is the fuel squirted in an engine equipped with gasoline direct injection?
Into the zone.
Zero.
Directly into the cylinder. What's another thing about those? They have high fuel pressure.
Yes, they did.
Usually like from 400 to 4,000 pounds or something like that. All right. What part turns the fuel injectors on and off?
PCM.
A PCM. A port type injection system squirts fuel where?
In the intake port, near the intake valve.
Okay, now why is gasoline direct injection considered better than port fuel injection?
I can't
Well,
remember.
because it goes right into the cylinder.
Because you said it had something to do with the intake and the.
I'll tell you what the deal is. On a gasoline direct injection engine, not only can you determine how much fuel you put in there, you can determine how it's injected and when it's injected. You cannot do that on a on a port fuel injected engine because it's behind the valve. The fuel doesn't go in there until the valve opens. So you can actually have either a stratified or homogeneous charge. In other words, stratified meaning, when you can fire the injector rapid fire and go pop, 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 and make that kind of, or a homogeneous charge where you just spray it in there and it burns evenly. That's what, and then it makes teeny, 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 tiny little particles of gas that burn more completely than you do whenever you're just letting it wash in there. So there's a bunch of reasons for that. So you'll find something like a Chevy Trailblazer, that size vehicle, with a 1.6 liter engine. And it will have lots of power because of gasoline direct injection. And where have you seen those? Have you seen GDI engines? I mean, the GDI on stuff right here? Around, have you seen gasoline direct injection vehicles?
Well, you said we had one here. Which one was it?
No, gasoline direct injection, we hadn't seen any of those.
Oh.
Not flex fuel. I'm talking about, and you'll see Hyundais, and there's a lot of them driving around. You'll see GDI on the back of them. So that's important to understand how that works,
Is that Sonata Hyundai?
Yes, but it's not GDI. That was not GDI, All right, let me see here. Fuel pressure regulator can be mounted where?
Either A or B.
Either it can either be back at the fuel pump regulating it all the way up, or it can be on the, they usually like to regulate it back there because they like to run the fuel through the heat of the engine and back to the tank. Idle speed is controlled by what?
Either B or C.
Either B or C, idle air control or electronic throttle control. Where's the fuel pressure regulator located on a return type fuel system?
The inlet of the fuel rail
No,
or the outlet?
the outlet of the fuel rail. Identify the throttle position sensor assembly in this diagram.
C.
See.
C.
Well, that didn't take you that long to do that, did it? Are you sure?
Yes.
Yeah.
You're absolutely sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Let me see here. Is that all my questions? I got one more, don't I? Or do I?
Huh?
No, that's all of them. That's all I'm totaling. Okay, that's cool. Wait a minute, you guys.
What?
I was confused about your answer to this last one
Why?
See,
What?
because everybody got it wrong.
It's A. It's A, isn't it?
It's on the opposite side. What is C? What is C in that drawing? Come on, you guys. That's the motor that operates the throttle.
That's what?
So,
The motor.
so the,
There's a motor that drives the throttle plate on that.
so the answer
Got it?
is B and it's A.
On the opposite side of where the motor is where that is on this one. Yeah.
So is A.